Good morning, and welcome to Globe Summit 2024. My name is Teresa Hopkins-Staton, and I'm the president of Eversource Energy Foundation and vice president of corporate citizenship and equity for Eversource Energy. I'm thrilled to welcome all our virtual viewers to this session of the Globe's fourth annual event under the theme, Boston Breakthroughs. Eversource is honored to partner with the Boston Globe to support the journalist-led panel discussions and fireside chats over the next 2 days, highlighting the people, organizations who are breaking through to drive change, innovation locally and nationally. As the region's largest energy provider, we understand the increasing concerns of climate change, and we accept the profound responsibility to deliver solutions. Impacts of climate change, the evolution of new technology, and the need for a just energy transition create a complex set of challenges that we are addressing head-on as we transform our grid for the future. Changes in the way our transmission and distribution systems deliver electricity are already underway and will continue to accelerate. As technologies like rooftop solar and battery storage become more efficient, many households will rely on these behind-the-meter resources for their electricity needs. One of the most important investments over the next decade for a future grid is the deployment of advanced meter infrastructure, or AMI. These smart meters will provide customers with more information about their energy use and will allow us to communicate more frequently and accurately with them during outages and storm restoration. And we are mindful of providing energy solutions that will also lessen environmental impacts and burdens that have been historically and disproportionately borne primarily by communities of color. Equity, a cornerstone of Eversource's vision for the future, demands deep and committed community and customer engagement and input from stakeholders with established, trusting relationships in the communities we serve. At Eversource, we are excited about the future as we continue to expand and strengthen our relationships, develop innovative solutions, and focus on a just, clean energy transition. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce our next session titled Investing in Climate Innovation. Our panelists for this discussion are Emily Reichert, Ph.D., CEO of Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, Stephen Fox, partner of Propeller, and David S. Miller, Ph.D., co-founder and managing partner of Clean Energy Ventures. Our panel will be moderated by the Boston Globe's Ideas editor, Brian Bergstein. I'll turn things over to Brian now to start the discussion with our esteemed panelists.
Thank you. Good to be here. Thanks to everybody who's joining in. Let's get right into it because there's so much to talk about. I think any of us could talk about climate tech all day. Just to set the stage, just so everybody knows what is, the position everybody's coming from, going down the line here. So David, you are indeed co-founder and managing partner at Clean Energy Ventures, based in Boston. You've invested in dozens of climate tech startups. He's an engineer by training, has founded several companies, serves on the board of several others, and is especially focused on carbon emissions mitigation over the next 25 years. Stephen Fox is a partner at Propeller Ventures, which is focused essentially on investing in ocean-related technologies. We'll get into some of that, but in general, that ocean climate nexus includes a lot of things from carbon removal to biologically driven material science, offshore wind, and so on. And then Emily Reichert from the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. That's a quasi-public economic development agency that aims to make our Commonwealth as much of a hub for climate tech as it is for the life sciences. And previously, she headed Greentown Labs, which is the largest climate tech startup incubator in North America. So I'm really excited about this, and I think a lot of people tuning in will really want to know what is lighting you guys up these days. Like, what are some of the coolest technologies that are, emerging, looking most promising in climate tech? Whoever wants to jump in, I'd love to hear what you're most excited about.
I can start. So just to add on to Mass CEC, what is how we refer to Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, we are really thinking about our role as a state government agency, a quasi-government agency, as an investor and a supporter of this early stage startup ecosystem. We're trying to make that more about the later stage, but maybe I'll get to that in a later discussion here. But in terms of what we are seeing now in climate tech in the Boston area, I'd say it's been a really exciting trend towards solving the big challenges that remain when you think about emissions. So when people think about clean energy, you might think of wind or solar. Perhaps you expand that to decarbonizing buildings and also reducing transportation emissions. But it's actually the case that from a global emissions perspective, we need to be thinking about things like reducing cement emissions, which is, I believe, 8% of global emissions, and reducing steel production emissions, which is 11% of global emissions. So in the Boston area, what we've seen over the past few years is that there has been a groundswell of both startups being formed and investments in these big, I'd say, big impact areas. And I think we are the right place for those type of things to happen because we spawn innovation like crazy. We're great at spinning technology out from universities and forming it into startups. We have an amazing ecosystem of investors, startups, and startup support organizations. And so it makes sense that it's happening here because the way that we think about our role, I think generally in Massachusetts and in Boston, is that we solve global problems. And so this would just be one that adds to a long list of many.
So I'll build on that. So we talked before, and we both wanted to really focus on industrial decarbonization. So at Clean Energy Ventures, our mission is every company we invest in has to have the potential of mitigating 2.5 gigaton CO2 equivalent emissions by 2050. And so in order to have that scale of mitigation, you have to take on very, very high carbon intensive industries and processes. And so, to that point, and to get into the specifics a little bit, if you want to decarbonize steel, concrete, glass, fertilizer production, right? These very large industries, they require very, very high temperatures and very dense amounts of energy. And traditionally, that has only come from fossil fuel. And that's why they are such highly emitting. But there are two other forms of energy that are zero carbon. One is hydrogen. So one company that we've invested in, Advanced Ionics, as an electrolyzer technology that can separate H2O into the hydrogen and oxygen. It can do it very, very efficiently, more efficiently than other processes, and hence you have your hydrogen. But once you have your hydrogen, you haven't solved the whole problem because there are places where you can electrolyze using very, very cheap electricity, but that might not be the place where you're producing the steel or glass or concrete, so you have to then transport the hydrogen. Transporting hydrogen is very hard. It's a gas. It's a light gas. So we just announced yesterday an investment in a company called Ayrton, which uses a liquid organic hydrogen carrier to basically bind the hydrogen into a very safe liquid fuel that can easily be transported. And then you can have the hydrogen anywhere you need. And then the other form of energy that can be used for high heat is electricity, which can be produced from wind, solar, other renewable sources. So a Massachusetts company we've invested in is Electrified Thermal. And what they can do is they can produce 1,800 degrees Celsius, very, very hot thermal energy from electricity and store it in bricks, ceramic bricks. and they can do it very efficiently. They can store that energy over a significant period of time, and then that energy can be used as needed for industrial processes. And again, entirely zero carbon when your source is renewable energy. So the point is that we do have zero carbon options to decarbonize these very, very high carbon intensive industries.
Yeah, and I would say, for us, we think about how decarbonization touches every part of the global economy. The three areas that we're spending a lot of time in right now is one, thinking about measurement and greater sampling so we know where to target incredible investments in decarbonizing technologies. The second is carbon management and removal, which is working with industrial partners, and we're an ocean-based fund, so we believe the ocean has an outsized role to play in how we manage and remove carbon from the atmosphere because the train has already left the station. The impacts of climate change are hitting us stronger every single year and will continue to do so. So we also look at adaptation and resilience. And we made a great co-investment with MassCEC in allium engineering, which is working on the sexiest material out there, rebar, to make it stainless cladded so that it performs better. It lasts longer, it's lower carbon, and we don't have to replace it. I think as ocean investors, we realize that salt water basically destroys everything over time. And so when we met the allium folks, it was like I'd been looking for them everywhere, which was to say that they can create a rebar that lasts 5x what a normal rebar will in an ocean infrastructure. And that's massive, both in avoiding the emissions of having to replace that infrastructure in these high emitting sectors every 15, 20 years, but also provides a pathway for folks to re-envision how we're going to use materials in a clean energy or climate tech transition.
So as much as I think it's really cool to talk about the actual technologies, I'd be remiss in a panel on investing in climate innovation if I didn't ask you sort of how you think about the return on investment on some of these decarbonization technologies. Because I think for a long time, people have maybe thought of climate tech as being renewable energy. Think about electricity production. And fortunately, we've seen these remarkable drops in the cost of solar and wind, and maybe we'll see even more declines in battery storage. But how do you get a steel producer to want to use decarbonized production, or a cement producer? Like, what is the return on investment there for the companies that are aiming to do this industrial decarbonization without any further government policy to kind of provide a boost? Like, how do you think about why people will pay for that? Why companies will pay for that?
So I can start. So first of all, the lowest cost energy production in the world is solar and wind today, right? That wasn't true 20 years ago, it's true today. So if you want to lower your costs, you want to use renewable energy. Now there are other issues you have to deal with, intermittency, hence you need some form of storage or load management, but those are manageable and still can be done at lower costs. So why would industry want to do this? Because it's going to lower their costs. And also, there are geopolitical issues with fossil fuels and transportation, and so you could actually have lower cost, higher reliability, higher security, higher national security, and you're also, preventing, climate destruction, which is going to be the highest cost of all. And our thesis as a firm is that if the only thing you care about is financial returns, say you don't care anything about the survival of humanity, you only just want to make money, the best investment you can make is climate tech. Because the world has to make this transition. If our civilization is going to thrive, we have to transition our industry to decarbonized world. And that is going to involve, hundreds of trillions of dollars of investment, which are going to more than pay off. But these are going to be the best possible, the highest returning investments that can be made over the next 10, 20 years.
Yeah, and I would say what we're tracking is like corporate and industrial timelines have moved up on how they're thinking about decarbonizing. And some of that they're willing to take a break on cost, but most of the time they're not, right? But the reality is, if you're following the two vectors, the decreasing costs in energy production and new materials and all these different climate tech innovations are meeting the demand of corporations and industrials and governments to transition rapidly. We're seeing it today in procurement of offshore wind technologies that frankly have just like a ton of existential crises facing them right now. But the demand from government and the demand from folks who need to balance the intermittency of solar with the intermittency of wind and then load management and whatnot have to meet somewhere in the middle. And so you're seeing folks take on what would be traditionally riskier capital on longer timelines and compress both of those.
Well, I'll answer this question just a little bit differently because of our state government perspective. When we think about return on investment, I don't disagree with anything the other panelists said, but we think of not only financial return, but we also think about economic development. We are an economic development agency. So how do our investments benefit the Commonwealth, the entire state of Massachusetts? And so that's something in my tenure, which is 10 months now, we've been thinking about very hard. How does the entire state participate in this? How do we make sure that there are jobs and that there are opportunities in climate tech all across the state? And so we've actually done a study. It is a climate tech economic development strategy, which shall be released sometime soon. It is done. That really looks at each region of our Commonwealth and what the strengths are, what the assets are, what already exists in that area, and how can we build on it. So for example, we're starting to see an industrial decarbonization cluster build up around Holyoke and Springfield and Chicopee. You've got a company like Sublime Systems that's making low carbon cement, doing their manufacturing and production right there in Holyoke, Massachusetts. You've also got Clean Crop, who is changing the way that seeds are handled in agriculture, reducing the carbon emissions associated with that, having their manufacturing in Holyoke as well. You know, when you look at our coasts, you have Cape Cod and the islands, you have the North Shore. Both of those areas stand to play an important role in offshore wind, but also the innovations that we're going to need to continue to make offshore wind ever more efficient. And that innovation can happen in both of those places. There are great assets in Hui, for example, in marine monitoring, and we're just starting to see what's coming out of the North Shore. So really, when we think about return on investment, we're thinking about the people and the jobs, the manufacturing and the tax base, and what we can do to make sure that these companies stay here in Massachusetts and grow here in Massachusetts.
Well, Emily, I'm glad you mentioned this idea, this question of like what it will take to get more companies to stay here. I wonder if we can all talk a little bit more about the sort of local pluses and minuses of investing in or starting up businesses like these in Massachusetts. The advantages of being here are obvious. I don't need to, flatter our audience by, reminding everybody, that this is such a hub of innovation for obvious reasons. But this is known as a state where there's a high cost of doing business. It's, been seen many times that companies often start here and scale up elsewhere. They'll maintain a smaller presence here if they stay here at all. So how do you think about that, about keeping these startups actually here, continuing to build on what they've started here?
I could give one example. So first of all, of course, Massachusetts has the greatest universities. And, we really enjoy seeing the innovation that's coming out across all of the universities. I'll give one example. A company called Boston Materials spun out of Northeastern. And when they started, they were in a Northeastern-sponsored lab, and, they've created a new class of materials. So they use carbon fiber as an input, they magnetically align it, and creates a material that has much better thermal, electrical, and mechanical properties than almost any other form of composite material. And this is going to make everything from data centers to supersonic aerospace vehicles much more energy efficient and much better. So it can really reshape the world. And so this is a company that needs to manufacture this material. They're now in their third manufacturing facility. All of them have been in Massachusetts. They now have full-scale production. They can produce, tens of millions of dollars worth of material on an annual basis, or even more so. And they've been able to hire, an extremely high-quality workforce, and never leaving the state of. In fact, we're a co-investor with Mass Clean Energy Center, who provided critical early support for the company, especially when we were going through COVID. So I think, very strong support, and I don't know if this could have happened anywhere other than Massachusetts.
We have a couple Boston boosters on our team, and we're a Boston-based firm. So we think about this a lot. We have a dashboard that we use that tracks the climate unicorns that are out there. There are about 80 of them globally. There are 17 in Silicon Valley, and there are 8 here in Boston. In our own portfolio, we have 20 companies we've invested in. 9 have originated here in Boston, and 3 of them have left at this point. And so we talk a lot about what's the support needed, what's missing. And what we draw on a lot from is, why did Boston win biotech, right? Silicon Valley had crushed on SaaS. It looks like they're going to win AI pretty handily. And so why climate tech, and why should it be in Boston? Obviously, the universities are a big part of it. But if we look at biotech, there were other decades in the making policy moves and investment moves that happened, like the Cambridge City Council, I wish it was Boston City Council. Cambridge City Council passed a law that allowed DNA trials and DNA experimentation to happen in the 70s. Biogen set up headquarters here months later. These are the types of, in climate tech, we're gonna have to push boundaries of what feels comfortable to folks. I think about adaptation and resilience in particular here, where we're gonna have to put stuff on our coastlines or to combat forest fires or whatever it may be that is gonna push the comfort of legislators and of populations. But Massachusetts has to be bold to do that, and Boston has to be particularly bold. We already have the inherent advantages of universities. We have natural clusters that form here. We have a lot of the strengths. And then we have to also be strategic. We can't own all of climate tech. Like I said, climate tech literally is every part of the global economy should be interested in climate tech. So what are the things that are our strengths? And Emily knows better than anyone.
But so what in particular do you think the state could do more to essentially, set that stage? What would you like to see?
I mean, the life sciences trajectory, going from a place that, there was a strong ecosystem of life sciences 15 years ago here in the Boston area, to today, where we have 18 out of the 20 headquarters of life sciences companies in the greater Boston, Massachusetts area, is quite a feat. How did we do that? I want to point to policy and investment. And what happened 15 years ago under Deval Patrick's administration was an investment of $1 billion over 10 years, specifically for life sciences. And that was such a catalyst because it showed the state support for this. It was a welcome sign to businesses from across the world that Massachusetts was open for business, that there was already a strong cluster, and you could come here through tax incentives, through capital investments, through workforce investments, and through really what I would call is kind of a concierge that invited companies, large and small, to be part of this ecosystem. So we're standing on the precipice of that right now for climate tech. We've got a strong ecosystem, and the governor filed a bill, the Economic Development Bill, which has made it through both chambers of the legislature, still in negotiations at this moment, but we're hopeful that will make its way through, which is basically building off that life sciences initiative to do the same thing for climate tech. So it would put $1 billion into climate tech. And by the way, we've done a study, there is a 12x return on investment in terms of how much money we put in, how much we get back out for the people of Massachusetts. So there's a big return on investment there. What does it do? It fills in these gaps that we know exist in the Massachusetts ecosystem. We're great at the early stage. At the later stage, we struggle to keep companies here. But we know if their first test demonstration opportunity to partner with their first customer happens here, they're more likely to stay here. It makes Massachusetts more sticky. So we're planning to create a testing and demonstration network across the entire Commonwealth that is easy for startups to access. A second thing that startups struggle with is the capital expenditures needed to buy pieces of equipment to do those testing and demonstration types of operations. And that's another piece of this bill that will be able to work with tax incentives, which motivate folks to increase the number of jobs that they will be able and willing and able to fill and grow here in Massachusetts. That's a third piece of it. So all of these things are within that bill, and we believe we're addressing the things that will push companies over the edge of wanting to be here based on our already really strong ecosystem.
So we're almost out of time. This has to be a little bit of a lightning round. Are you more optimistic now than you were when you got into this work? Less so, the same? Why don't we just go down the line? Sure. David.
So I got into this work about 20 years ago. And look, I mean, if you look at where things are today versus then, first of all, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. We have an extremely urgent problem. It's the greatest challenge our generation faces, civilization defining. If we get this wrong, our human civilization is in big trouble. But there's a lot we can do about it. There is so much more investment in so many more investors, so many entrepreneurs, potential for good policy, such as carbon pricing. So extremely urgent, great problem, but a lot of folks who are addressing it now, so that gives me optimism.
Stephen.
I've been an ocean advocate and nerd for about 15 years, trying to make investments into the space and push it forward. And I'm so much more enthusiastic than I was 15 years ago, in particular in the ocean's ability to help mitigate climate change. Carbon removal opportunities are abound. Later, for those who will stay, there will be a geoengineering panel in the ocean I hope you'll tune into. And I really do believe that the opportunities to decarbonize are in front of us, and there are more and interesting innovations coming every day. It's just about pace and implementation.
Well, when I got involved in the field 10 or so years ago, it was hard to find investors who wanted to invest in what we then called clean tech. And since 2021, I'd say, there has just been money pouring in. I think that the money has now gotten smarter as the years have gone by, so that's a very good thing. But overall, I guess I'm optimistic because I believe in innovators, and innovators are rampant here in Massachusetts. We have such an important role to play. We don't have the biggest emissions, but we have the biggest ability to make an impact on global emissions based on the innovation that comes out of our local universities. So I'd say I'm bullish on our contribution, and the investments that are made by the folks on this panel are just such an important part of that trajectory of really making a global impact right here in Massachusetts.
Thank you for that illuminating conversation. And thank you as well to our audience joining us virtually. Again, I am Teresa Hopkins-Staton with Eversource Energy, and we at Eversource are proud to be a presenting sponsor of this year's Globe Summit and support discussions like the one that we just had. And hopefully you found it very informative and certainly encouraging, because a lot of innovation is already taking place. I invite you to stay on the stream for the next session in the Globe Summit program, a fireside chat titled LGBTQ+ Care Advances, Inequality Persists, moderated by Teresa Gaffney, morning rounds writer and podcast producer for STAT. That discussion will begin in just a few minutes. And again, thank you for joining.